Apostates Anonymous, the show you turn to when you're no longer an evangelical. With your hosts, authors Keith Giles and Matthew J. DiStefano. Hello, all you cool cats and kittens.
Meow, baby.
Meow. Good morning, Keith. It's another episode of your fourth favorite podcast.
Yes, it is. Oh, yes. No, I love doing these. I really do, and looking forward to it. This is going to be a lot of fun. I hope. Sitting here with my second cup of coffee. Second cup. Having my second cup.
Oh, shameless plug! You son of a bitch.
Uh-huh.
You're really pulling the thread on this one.
I'm pulling the threads right off of that one there. Yep.
Yeah. Well, before we get going, to all those listening, we know the numbers, and so we don't have as many numbers as listen to it as review on iTunes. So if you're listening and you haven't reviewed on iTunes, go to iTunes right now and please rate and review this show.
Please do. And yes, please also support our sponsors because, it's really important for us to be able to continue to do the show. All of our sponsors have been really supportive. We're really blessed that we have sponsors. And so, if you would support them, that would mean a lot to us. Really,
it would mean a lot. And speaking of sponsors, we're going to piggyback kind of where we left off with our last sponsor. And this one's a little similar, and you're going to notice a theme. And so, producer, if you could cue that up for us, that'd be great.
One of the things that makes this country great is the fact that every American has the right to practice their religion without fear. This means that Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Sikhs, and Jews should back off so real Americans like us can freely practice our God-given right to pray where we want, worship Jesus at a crime scene, or say Merry Christmas at Starbucks. Hello, I'm Pastor Greg Masters, and if you're like me, you're concerned about religious freedom in America. Do you want a mosque on every street corner, or Buddhist kids praying next to yours in school? I didn't think so. That's why I created Religious Freedom for Me, to fight for my religious rights and keep America free of other religions, just like our founding fathers intended. If you'd like to help us fight for your religious freedom, please visit www.religiousfreedomforme.com today. Your generous donation will help us in our fight to keep America Christian. Remember, America gave us religious freedom. Now, we just need to get free from those other religions so we can enjoy our freedom as God intended.
Don't you love that stock audio?
Oh, I really do. The music really makes it really gives that extra special little touch. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't noticed, part of my skill set is making pointless audio and putting it together with music, as we did in our Pal episode of Heretic Happy Hour.
That was beautiful.
It really is a pointless skill of mine.
Yes, I got to say yes. Speaking of that Pal episode, the clip that we pulled them all together, my favorite part was it still makes me laugh when you started playing the sad violins.
The sad violin.
Oh God, that's when I lost it. It was just so beautiful.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things. There's so much stock audio that I have access to, and it's like I could spend a little more time and make it perfect, but it's like sometimes just put some music to it.
That's right. Yeah, so beautiful. Yeah. So thank you, Pastor Masters. We'll have to have you back. I think
Pastor.
The Master Pastor, Pastor Masters. I think he may come back again. We may have to hear from him again down the road.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see if if he has something else to offer, then absolutely. Friends of the show are always welcome back.
Yes.
Maybe we'll do a poll and see if our listeners, if they have any suggestions on who we should reach out for a sponsorship.
Oh, that'd be great. Yes, please do. We love hearing from listeners. So yes, if you have any feedback, suggestions for ideas for future sponsors you'd like to have us approach, and maybe they'd be willing to support us, that'd be great. Yes.
Then just text the hotline 240-343-7379. Again, that's 240-343-7379.
Yes, and when you call that number, please specify Apostates Anonymous.
Please troll their hotline.
Yes.
And let them know. Anyway, yes, as we promised last week, Keith, I wanted to talk about you going full heretic and what you mean by that, maybe expand on your Patheos article, and then we can maybe broaden the scope of our discussion and just talk about what heresy means and what it means to you and why it's a pointless term and why, I mean, for God's sake, we have 2 podcasts where we tongue-in-cheek heretic and apostate. And so obviously it's a meaningless term for us, but what do you start off? Maybe what do you mean by that?
Well, yeah, when I wrote that article, it was just, I think what, a couple of things sort of led to that. So one of them was I am just getting more and more exhausted, seeing posts on Facebook or even people asking me questions directly, kind of like this, questions that are like, Adam and Eve in the garden, so what do you think? Why do you think Eve ate the apple? What do you think Adam was thinking about when blah, 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 like as if they're real people. Right.
Yeah.
And so that drives me crazy. Or stuff like, do you think Satan and the demons are going to be saved, at the end of time, since you're a universalist, or, what do you think Satan is doing right now in the world? And how is Satan manipulating governments or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, there's no actual guy named Satan, right? So those kinds of things, that literalism of the Bible, just also people like constantly dropping in conversations, again, mostly on social media, but things like there'll be a disagreement about something, and then somebody wants to win the argument by saying, yeah, but the Bible says this, and here's cut and paste, this verse says this, and, case closed. And I'm just beyond caring anymore what the Bible says about this or that. I mean, I know that's dangerous for me to say on one level, because I don't want it to sound like I don't value, at least there's some good things in the Bible, but I'm beyond feeling like it's the only thing that I'm going to refer to, and it's certainly not something that it says it in the Bible, so I can't do this or that. I have to live this way or that way, or I have to think this way because they did. So I guess I just noticed I'm moving away from that kind of way of approaching the Bible. I mean, I kind of was already there, but I feel like I'm moving way beyond it now, where I don't even want to pretend anymore. I just want to just let everybody know I don't care. I don't care what it says, and I'm not going to live my life by that stuff. So that was part of it. And then the second half of that equation was that I've just started reading a lot of the Gnostic text, and really, like I read the Gospel of Truth, which I never even ever heard of it before, so I read that, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I'm doing a study right now on the Gospel of Thomas on my Patreon page. It's called The Inner Circle, and every Friday I'm posting an article where we look at one of the sayings of Jesus from the Gospel of Thomas and kind of exploring what it's saying, what it's about, and all of that. So I really find myself leaning more towards that direction, right? So I think becoming more Gnostic is definitely something that people would say that's heretical.
Well, literally so, as in
yes,
the history, yeah,
yes, the way they treated Valentinius or Marcion or those guys. But yeah, I guess I'm more comfortable just coming out and saying, yeah, you know what? I really appreciate a lot of the what they call those Gnostic texts. I don't really know. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But yeah, like when I read even the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, believe it or not, I read that. I read the Gospel of Philip. I read, some of these other texts. There's another one called Thunder something, Perfect Voice or something like that. That's also really interesting. Anyway, just that I'm feeling like that's more where I'm curious about. I'm leaning more in that direction. The whole idea of non-duality and connection and oneness and all that. much more excited about that kind of stuff. And you find that in the Bible too, by the way. You find that in the New Testament a lot as well.
Well, and you would find a lot of what you're saying in a mystical Christian tradition as
Yeah,
well. So
yes,
C.C. Rohr,
yeah,
Merton,
yeah. Teresa of
Teresa of
Avila,
Avila. Sure.
Julian of Norwich.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Would you still identify as a Christian or a heretical Christian? Obviously, just because you're on Apostates Anonymous doesn't mean you're necessarily an apostate. We're playing
right.
with the language there, and we don't really give a shit what it means. But would you self-identify as a Christian still, or does it not matter to you?
I think I'm at the phase right now where it kind of just doesn't matter to me.
Right. Okay.
If some people still would listen to what I say and say, no, Keith's still a Christian, I'd say, okay. And if other
Yeah.
people listened to me and said, I don't think Keith's a Christian anymore, I'd be like, okay. Like you said, it doesn't really
Yeah.
bother me one way or the other anymore. It's just become, I think that's part of what I'm saying. Like I used to care about that stuff a whole lot more. And I'm realizing now I don't necessarily care so much whether or not what I believe fits into even a historical Christian framework. Because I'm even feeling more like what a lot of that historical Christian framework. Like I've spent a lot of my time blogging and podcasting, always appealing back to the early church, right, the pre-Constantinian church, and I do really like
Right.
that phase of Christianity. I think that's the best. That was the golden age right there of Christianity, right there. But even then, even that, like I've been reading Elaine Pagel's book, Beyond Belief, where she goes into more of the history and some of the tension between, Tertullian and Irenaeus and these guys and some of these Gnostic people. And when I see the way they responded to people who just had different views and different ideas, and that's why I wrote a post after my I'm Going Heretic one about that and just said, like, dude, this deconstruction movement started back then. It was going on, around Tertullian and Irenaeus, like, late first, early second century. Deconstruction had already started. People were already saying, yeah, I know the Bible says this. Yeah, I know Paul says this. But what about these other things, right? And
Right.
people were already redefining terms and rethinking meanings and questioning things and wanting to move away. And a lot of the ways those early Christians responded by calling people heretics, by coming up with the creeds, by deciding, what was the canon of Scripture. That was all specifically about eliminating these other texts, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip. They wanted these things out. They did not want these things to be considered a Scripture. And so that's why they were so eager when Constantine shows up and says, guys, you should have a statement of faith of what makes somebody a Christian. They're like, yes, great idea. Let's do it. And now we've got the Roman government backing us up. The empire is going to enforce this by the sword. You've got to agree with us, right? Or these are the only books, which means it's not these other books. That was all about winning this war. The war. In other words, they had declared war on deconstruction way back then, right?
Before John Cooper did.
Way before John Cooper, yes.
Yeah.
They had declared war on deconstruction, and this was their way of winning the war.
Well, just look at the things Tertullian has said about, like, there's one quote in particular that I've used before about how something to the effect of when he's in heaven, he's going to look down on the philosophers who argued and disagreed with him with glee as they like writhe about in the flames. And I'm like, God damn, like John Cooper, eat your heart out. You ain't got nothing on Tertullian. Tertullian's a gangster. Like,
yeah,
like these people, the people who they declared war on intellectually, like I'm guessing that Tertullian literally thought that at some point in his posthumous life and existence that he would get the last word when he sees his intellectual foes suffering for all eternity in hell.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing. Tertullian is somebody, like early on when I first came across him, I was only reading certain quotes of him, right? So when I would read Tertullian's quotes, let's say about his ecclesiology, I'd be like, oh yes, so good. Oh yeah, love it. Or when I'd read quotes from Tertullian about nonviolence and, enemy love and all that. Yes. Oh yeah, he gets it. Oh, this guy is great. And then I read a quote of his about women.
About women. God damn.
Like, screw this guy. Oh my gosh, I want to go back in time and just kick this guy in the nuts. It's like such a dick. And then, like you said, then I'm reading Elaine Pagel's book, and she's going more into like his reactions to Valentinus and these other guys. And yeah, dude, he was not a nice guy. Really,
Yeah.
not a very nice guy. So, and a lot of these guys are that way, you know. I think I can't remember who it was now. My brain. Was it Irenaeus? I'm trying to think if it was Irenaeus.
Do you need third cup with Keith?
Maybe I need a third cup. I don't have the book in front of me, so I can't remember who it was. But I want to say it was Irenaeus. Anyway, there was one guy that sort of made it his mission to silence these guys. Valentinus was the guy that they think Valentinus was the one who wrote the Gospel of Truth. If it wasn't him, it was one of his disciples. And it's so beautiful. I mean, the language in the Gospel of Truth, first of all, it's all about connection and oneness, right? With God, non-duality. There's no separation and all that, which is really great. I'm really leaning more in that direction anyway. But then the way it talks about God as being a mystery, which I love because my next book's all about this. How God is a mystery that we cannot, that God is beyond our comprehension. And it uses these beautiful terms to describe God as, like it talks about Jesus of the infinite sweetness, and it talks about God as the one beyond, beyond speaking of, beyond expression, beyond comprehension. I just think, man, this is so great. So here's the thing. If I lived back then, guess what? I would have been Gnostic. I would have been hanging out with Valentinus. I would have been one of those guys that Irenaeus and these other guys would have been saying, yep, that guy's a heretic. So, or, way out in left field. And that's just kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that that we have the same sort of debates almost 2,000 years later.
Yeah.
And there are still groups who... So it's like, for me, it's like the gatekeepers of the faith have declared us heretics, where we don't really care about the terms necessarily.
No.
And so for me, it's like, okay, you took away my Christian card long ago. My Christian ID card, my membership club.
Your membership card, yes.
And I'm to the point where I'm like, fine, have it. I don't give a fuck. It doesn't affect me in any way, shape, or form. And the only thing you have over us is your threat of hell.
Yeah.
And since we don't believe in it, it's really not much of a threat at all. It's like, at least today, for the most part, people aren't going to come and kill you for being a heretic.
Right.
Now, obviously, we have a history of doing that. So they'll ostracize you and they'll demonize you on social media and things like that. But you know what? Have it. Have my good Christian standing. And if your God needs me to have my good Christian standing, then I have a lot of questions for that God, because he certainly seems a little bit egocentric and insecure and like he's making up for a lot of stuff, just kind of like y'all.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and then I really recommend, if anyone hasn't read Elaine Pagel's book, Beyond Belief, it's so fascinating because there's a place in there where she's talking about this tension between, and I just looked it up, by the way, it was Irenaeus, how so he saw these so-called quote unquote Gnostic Christians, and we should probably address that term in a minute, but anyway, these what we have now termed these Gnostic Christians, Valentinus, Ptolemy, Heraclian, people like that. So Irenaeus called them heretical, right, and was opposing them. But then there's a quote from her book where he says, let's see, where they respond to him saying, "We too have accepted the faith that you describe, and we have confessed the same things that you profess: faith in one God, in Jesus Christ, in the virgin birth and the resurrection, when we were baptized. But since that time, following Jesus' injunction to, quote, seek and you will find, have been striving to go beyond the church's elementary precepts to attain spiritual maturity." So, they're saying at least some things I used to say at the very beginning of my deconstruction journey, which was that, you're trying to define me out of the club. You're trying to tell me I'm not a Christian because I don't believe in penal substitution and all these things. And I'm like, hey, listen, I believe most of the things you believe, right?
Right.
On that list, no, I wouldn't say virgin birth and resurrection, but I would redefine that probably differently than they would. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, I do believe in some of all the basic things that you believe in, and yet because I see them slightly different, because I have a different perspective on some of those things, and I've gone a little bit further down the road to some other things. You know, you are determined to cancel me, disqualify me, ruin me in the eyes of other people. And that's exactly what Irenaeus was doing. He was going around sending letters to churches telling them, do not read Valentinus's writings. Do not read the Gospel of Thomas. Do not read the Gospel of Truth. Do not teach from these things. But here's the thing that was so amazing. Not only was he unsuccessful in that, trying to like cancel them basically like that, like telling everybody in the internet of the day, which was like one letter at a time being sent by a runner, it'll get there a month from now, hopefully, and no one gets killed. But anyway, that's what he was trying to do, to ruin them, cancel them, silence them, demonize them. It didn't work. And for two reasons. One, a lot of the people in the churches around that time who received his letter were reading it, and they were like, but you know what? The people in my church who follow those kinds of thinking, the Valentinus and the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Truth and all that stuff, that group of people are my best people. They're the most loving, kind, giving, active people in my church. I'm not going to kick them out. You're crazy. And then the other reason why it didn't work was that most of the people who were in that movement following, Valentinus and Ptolemy and all those guys, the quote unquote Gnostics, they were pastors. They were the leaders of those churches. And that's what was crazy. And again, very similar to deconstruction today. So many people that I talk to in like our Square One thing who go through deconstruction, I mean, I have at least 2 or 3 every time I do a Square One who say, I'm currently a pastor of a church. If they knew I was deconstructing, I'd lose my job. Or I was a pastor for years and years and years, and I finally just couldn't do it anymore and I quit. It's the same thing. Like from the beginning, this has been the issue. And
that's kind of what Phil Drysdale's research has shown. The more involved you are, the more likely you are to deconstruct.
Yes, that was fascinating.
That was fascinating, but it makes sense. It's like those who deconstruct are often accused of not taking the faith seriously or not holding to convictions. And it's like, well, no, some of us wrestled with these things and really thought about these things all the time. We weren't just like Sunday Christians. We were there on Wednesday. We were setting up music. We were tearing down. We were volunteering. People were going on missions trips. And like Phil says, like, it doesn't mean you're going to deconstruct. It just means that the percentages are skewed toward, those who are more involved tend to deconstruct the most.
Right. Because you ask questions.
You ask the questions.
You're reading and you're noticing that doesn't line up. Exactly. What I'm reading here doesn't line up with what my pastor is teaching, or what I'm experiencing. Right.
So let's talk about Gnosticism, because you've kind of painted a rosy picture of it, but I have some thoughts on it that I don't like. First of all, it seems contradictory when you say the non-dual ideas of Gnosticism, that within Gnosticism, and maybe particularly like Augustinian Gnosticism, where he came from, Manichaean Gnosticism, that there is a flesh-spirit split, and the flesh order is seen as negative or bad, while the spirit order is seen as positive or good and from God. And to me, that smacks of dualism.
No, I totally agree. And that's why I wanted to clarify when I talk about Gnosticism, because again, before I ever read any Gnostic text ever, right? So I only heard about Gnosticism from like maybe a Bible study going through one of Paul's letters, and they're saying, oh, right here, he's attacking Gnosticism, the Gnostic teaching and stuff. Oh, okay. Well, what's Gnosticism? Well, my Baptist pastor or, Sunday school teacher would say, well, Gnosticism was all about the flesh is evil and the spirit is good and blah, blah, blah. And that is true. There is an element of Gnosticism that was what they believed. And Gnosticism, I mean, when I talked to Matthew Corman about this, he's wonderful. He's a great resource on this. He talked about how the fact like there really is no one Gnosticism in the same way there's really sort of no one Christianity, right? It is a crazy wide spectrum of things. So within Gnosticism, yes, some people do take the flesh is evil, spirit is good mentality, and they take it to extremes, right?
Yes.
Now that so
Which
when I
which can be then used to like demonize, especially women and
oh yeah,
bodies and this and that.
absolutely, which of course Augustine did. Manichaeism was
Yeah.
very very notorious for that. So when I say Gnosticism, that I'm moving toward a Gnostic direction, I do not mean that. I do not embrace that. I don't. That's not the side of Gnosticism that appeals to me. Specifically, the side of Gnosticism. When I say, and maybe I shouldn't even use that term because I know it carries these connotations.
Yeah.
Really, what I'm saying is I embrace the non-dualism that I see
Yeah.
in a lot of in some of the writings. Again, I've not read all of them,
Yeah.
but of
Right.
the ones I've read, when I see how this non-dualistic teaching uh, was embedded in was such a core part, especially the Gospel of Thomas. In fact, that's what unlocked the Gospel of Thomas for me. I found this really great book called The Hidden Gospel of Thomas by William Duffy, and until I read that book, I thought the Gospel of Thomas was the stupidest thing I'd ever read. If you just read it flat and you don't have any context to it, it is just gobbledygook. It's nonsensical, nursery rhyme, blah blah, quasi wisdom. It reads like goofy, stupid stuff. It makes no sense. But what Duffy's book helped me to see was like, okay, but if you approach the Gospel of Thomas, the sayings of Jesus from the Gospel of Thomas, as that they are all about non-dualism and the illusion of separation. Now read it. Now, if you read it from that perspective, it makes complete sense. It's like, that has to be what this was all about. And so that's what I resonate with. I think it's so fascinating to me. And then to see also how that non-dualistic teaching, it really did kind of sneak into the Gospel of John, Colossians, Ephesians, which I find really fascinating because we know that Paul did not write. Well, some of us know that or suspect that Paul didn't write Colossians or Ephesians, and yet those are the two books that seem to have the most non-dualistic kinds of teachings in the New Testament, other than John, let's say, or maybe First John. And a handful of other places. But it's fascinating to me how that sort of creep into those, some of the original early New Testament letters and writings that became canonized. It's there. So the influence was there. It was there from the beginning. That's fascinating to me. And that's what I resonate with. So when I talk about Gnosticism, that's what I talk about resonating with, not the flesh is evil, only spirit is good kind of way of thinking of it. And I guess I tend to think where that came from, I'm just totally speculating here. But I think where this idea of where flesh kind of got demonized and spirit kind of got elevated, I would guess possibly it could arise from a non-dualistic framework in the sense that if your body, if the flesh is something that in your mind reinforces your separateness from other people, right? Well, I'm in this body and you're in that body, right? And this other person's over here in a different body. That, because what they're saying is that that's an illusion. Anything that you see that appears to support this idea of separation is an illusion because that's not reality. Reality is connection and oneness. It doesn't mean that you don't have a body. Of course you do. It's just saying that it's not an expression of ultimate reality. So I could see where you could go from that, like saying, no, your body, your separateness in your body from another person's physical body is an illusion. The reality is everyone is connected, right, to each other and to God and everything else. I could then see it going from that statement for someone to push it as far as to say, therefore, the body is completely, bad because of these other things.
Yeah, I think that's then to betray your own logic, though, too, because to be totally non-dual is to accept the dualism of our separate bodies.
Yes.
While you and I are definitely connected, you and I are definitely unique and
I'm
distinct.
not you, and you're not me. That's right. And you're in Keno, and I'm in El Paso, so we're definitely separate.
But the beauty in accepting the balance of the two, of the kind of contradictory and juxtaposed things, is that you and I can recognize our interconnectedness, but then have the space with which to even discuss this.
Yes.
So we need that separateness in order to even have this conversation. And so if we push the pendulum too far, that's when we get into the, well, therefore the body is bad or the flesh is bad. When it's like, no, I mean, something that'll always stick with me is the Richard Rohr quote of, to reject all dualism is itself dualistic.
Right.
And so we need those things. If you want to tell me how to drive to El Paso, I need to know whether to turn left or right and all those sort of
It
things. And
doesn't
we need
matter.
those,
It doesn't matter,
well,
Matt. You know
or
what?
just don't, yeah.
Eventually you'll arrive.
Yeah.
You know.
Don't be dual, Matt. Don't just, if it's a red light or a green light, just, man, just live, man.
Yeah. So
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you on that, because even as I'm reading through this the Gospel of Thomas thing, and each of the sayings of Jesus are meant to sort of bring you back to this idea of how separateness is an illusion and all that. I do think, yes, you can definitely take this too far, and you can reach a level of just, it's ridiculous, right? Like, you can't deny all uh, separation, because we do experience. In other words, in our experience, yes, we do experience this separation on different levels. But I think it's more of saying, like, that separation, which is real, and we do absolutely experience that,
Yeah.
that in itself is not the ultimate expression of who God is
Yes.
and what the universe is like. So there's analogies, right? You could say, like, if I put my hand into a glove, and if I like drew little faces on each of my fingers and put hair on them and a hat and clothing, and say, okay, so this is Bob and this is Steve. Like, each finger had a different name and a different personality, and I can move them independently. See, look, they're all different. But when I pull my hand out of the glove, it's one hand and it's Keith. It's all me, right? That's one analogy of way of looking at it. It's not saying that I don't have individual fingers and that I can't move them independently. Of course I do. But the ultimate reality behind that is they're all my hand and they're all part
Yeah.
of me. And that's just one way of kind of thinking about. Again, it's tough because these are analogies, and it's really sometimes difficult to wrap your brain around it, right?
Yeah. And analogies do help. And in fact, they're probably one of the only ways we can really talk about these things. And because I think the truth of the matter is that, let's just agree for a second that there is objective truth. We can only approach it subjectively.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of the I wrote an article recently about everyone being saved. Now, I think that's an objective truth, but subjectively, someone pointed out, like, how can you say people are saved when there's war and there's famine and there's what's going on in Ukraine and everything? And I said, yeah, you're exactly right. I don't think those people are experiencing salvation because
Right.
they're not experiencing healing or wholeness in the present. That doesn't. So it's like there's a objectively, everyone is everything's going to be fine. Everything's good. Everyone's saved, if you want to use that language.
Yeah.
But subjectively, we all experience hell.
That's right.
And so there's these two like almost mutually exclusive realities that are going on.
Yeah.
And so it's like it all harkens back to this kind of like, to accept the dualism is the unitive approach, is the truly non-dual approach, is to it's like, it's the one reason why I bristle at some of Buddhism, where to kill the ego, it's like, no,
You can't.
to put the ego in its proper place,
Yes.
because only the ego can say to kill the ego, because
Right.
we have to have our ego in order to communicate. We have to use words, to use language.
Yes.
So we have to have a truly unitive experience by accepting the non-duality
You're right.
and embracing it, and not letting it run amok, but putting it in its proper place with balance.
Right. Yeah. And I think, like, your analogy about, like, or the idea about, is everybody saved but not everyone's experiencing it. I would say the similar thing about, is when I say Christ is in everyone, and
Yeah.
then people will push back and say, well, so Christ is in a child molester, Christ is in a rapist, Christ is in a murderer, Christ is in a torturer. Yes. But when that person is doing those things, they're not living through the Christ that's in them. They're not acknowledging the Christ that's in them. They're oblivious to that. To the degree that you are aware of the Christ in you and you are living out of that identity of that Christ is in you, that if you did that, then you wouldn't be able to be a murderer, a rapist, a torturer, like all these things. Like, so what
Yeah.
these things are, it's not evidence that Christ isn't in those people or in those people that do those things. It's just evidence that in that moment, or at least at this point in this person's life, they're not living out of that reality. And so that's another distinction, right? Whether you're experiencing
Yeah.
it or whether you're living out of the reality of it, it doesn't negate the truth of the statement that Christ is in everyone.
Yeah. It's just we like to split things up into binary though. We
Yeah,
like to it's like when you talk about free will and predestination, it's
yeah,
like people cannot conceptualize the fact that it can be kind of both,
a little of
right?
both. Yeah,
Or a little of both, or maybe like a third way.
yeah,
And to use like I think this is where like Tolkien and Tolkien's writings got it like correct. Like Iluvatar is the god figure, and there is a like a almost predestined direction that the people of Middle Earth are to go. But there's many roads that get there, and a part of this whole mythology is the volition of the characters.
yeah,
The elves are men or dwarves or hobbits, and courage. So it's two other ingredients that they have to have. And it's not a direct path. Calvinists like to talk about like a direct predestination almost. And then,
right.
free will theists like their Arminians or whatever, like it's all human volition. Whereas it's this third way, really. It's a bit of both. It's God having a plan,
Yeah,
and there being many, many, many roads that take you there.
right. And that's a fascinating. I mean, gosh, I spent so many years of my life when I was doing apologetics in college, like debating and that whole thing about free will and
Were you a
predestination.
master debater?
in in more ways than one. Yes. So the idea, like, you get into these little things about, that God is a being outside of time, and time is like this, uh, sort of like a pen, or, something like an object that God can step out of and see there's the beginning, the middle, and here's how it ends. Here's how time and space all resolve in the end. And so, but if you zoom into, a particular moment on that timeline, people are making choices. So they have freedom in their moment, in the moment that they're in. But time has already, for God, time has already played out, and He knows how the movie ends. So it's like the idea that God knows what's going to happen does not mean God makes it happen. It means that in that moment, people made free choices to do certain things, and God just happens to know what those choices are. So it's like, for example, if I watch a movie, and I watch lots of movies, if I'm watching a movie, even a movie I've never seen before, right? And I know for a fact that if that lady opens that door, that guy's going to jump out with a machete and kill her. I know it. I know for a fact. Like, come on. It's going to happen. Here it comes. Here it comes. Oh, she opens the door. Aha. There's the guy with the machete, and he kills her. Did I write the script? No. Was I directing that movie? No. Did I tell that guy to jump out and kill her? No. But I just knew it was going to happen because I can kind of see where this is going, right? So you could know what's going to happen with, pretty certainty, right? But that doesn't mean you made it happen. But again, this is one of these things too, where I just don't give a shit anymore about this stuff. I don't care.
Yep, me neither.
The whole Greg Boyd had this whole thing. He got into trouble, this whole open theology thing, and Thomas J. Ord, his is, I think, a little bit more of like a continuation of that idea that God doesn't know what's going to happen, and because it hasn't happened yet, and so all that stuff. It's just another perspective, and it's interesting, and it's fun to have these philosophical conversations. But at the end of the day, I'm not walking around living my life.
Yeah, that seems such a limit on like that. Just yeah, I mean, it seems like an interesting conversation, but then it seems like it doesn't. Like again, like are we just trying to like systematize God?
Yeah,
Because like right there, I mean, I think I get why they're doing that because I think ultimately I think like the open theism question is trying to, like any theological question, is like it's theodicy.
yeah,
It's trying to understand the problem of evil and suffering.
yes,
But it also has its limits too, because it's like if we look at the universe, like in the double slit experiment, doesn't the future dictate the past in a way?
uh huh, Uh-huh.
And so all already that the universe then seems to know more than God.
Yeah.
And I've heard this theory. There's a theory from physicists right now, and I'm not a physicist. If that's a surprise to anyone, then you shouldn't be shocked. But like next to our universe is like an anti-universe that is
Yes.
running backward in time.
Yes.
I have no idea what I just fucking said. That just seems like meaningless nonsense to me.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, then like almost that seems to have more knowledge than God in a way.
Yeah.
If God can't know the future because it hasn't happened, it's like,
But yeah, so
well, yeah, I guess in a way, like, does the future even exist? Does the past even exist, or is it perpetual presence, like, or nowness? I mean, I don't
yeah,
know.
okay, but here's the thing. Even in what everything we just said, that whole idea of like free will and predestination, and does God do this or does God do that, or does God perceive this or does God perceive that, and is God allowing things? Is God outside of time? All of that language, all of that conversation presupposes that God is a separate being
Yes. Yep.
out there. And again, like
Yep.
what I'm moving towards now is that God isn't out there as some separate being or creature or
Right.
person, right? That God is all of us. God is in everything. That panentheism, right? This God idea.
Yeah.
So like, okay, so we just had that Awaken event in Nashville, which was awesome, by the way. And somebody raised their hand. Jim Palmer was speaking. It was so great. He did such a killer job. And so someone raised a hand and they were asking, like, why does God allow like the war in Ukraine or suffering in the world, blah, blah. So they asked him the typical question. And I just thought his answer was so great. He goes, notice the way you're asking that question. You're assuming when you ask that question that God is a being, a force out there above us somewhere, either orchestrating things or allowing things. But what if Christ is in you? So when you kind of like say, hey, God, why aren't you doing anything? Who are you talking to? Like, you should be talking to the Christ in you. If God is in you and God is not separate from you, then to be frustrated that God doesn't do something to change these things, you're talking to yourself. Or at least you are talking in some sense to the God that you are never separated from. Or in all of us. Like, we are all this expression of God. The question isn't why does God allow it as if God is some separate outside being or force. If God is in all of us, why do we allow it? Because we are expressions of God with flesh on, right? God is in all of us and in everything. So again, that's one of those things where as I'm shifting away from dualistic thinking and seeing God as not this separate person or force high above everything, directing things or allowing things, that God is an expression of all life in the universe, then those questions become kind of meaningless, kind of like
Yeah.
pointless.
That's kind of where I'm at. I think we would talk about it a little bit differently, but I think we ultimately would be pointing in the same direction, because I don't see God as a separate entity with even God's own personality. See, I used to think of God
Yeah.
having a personality.
No.
God may have infinite personality, but the way it's manifest is in every one of us and everything that exists.
Yes.
So I don't pray in any sort of traditional way. In fact,
No.
I just try to do that which is good and right and empathetic and compassionate, because
Yeah.
if that is God, then those are just synonyms for God. And I don't look to any sort of outside external source or force or anything like that, because I see God as almost like an empty vessel in which the entire universe is in.
Yes.
And so why would I be praying to see? It's funny when Derek and I Derek and I would say the same exact thing and mean totally different things. Derek would say God does not exist, and I would
Uh,
say God does not exist. Correct.
right. Well, you
God
don't mean
is
the same thing.
God. Derek would say God is nothing, and I'd say right. God is no thing.
No thing.
Like, and I would say that, like, almost like God is like the infinite nothingness, and everything kind of flows into that nothingness, everything in the universe. And so yeah, you're right. Why would I look to some god to end suffering when that thing that I'm talking to doesn't exist.
That's right.
Like we are that. We are the only
Yes.
ways in which we can get things done. Like,
Yeah.
so stop exporting your own authority.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Am I a Gnostic now, Keith?
I
Am I
think
a
you might
Gnostic?
be,
Oh,
or
shit.
yeah, or maybe we just need to come up with a better term because I think it's such a loaded term.
It's
The
very
average
loaded.
person, when you say Gnostic, they think you mean that
It's a
flesh is
pejorative.
evil. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
pejorative. Yeah, they think you mean flesh is evil, spirit is good, and all this kind of stuff. Like, well, no,
Yeah.
that's not what I mean. No, but I think that is a fascinating idea too about how that, like, going back to the thing about Derek, when he says God doesn't exist, like, well, not in the sense that I used to think of it, no, but at
Yeah.
the same time, everything that exists is God. So
Yeah.
it's the opposite way of saying it. Like, to say God doesn't exist would be to say nothing exists. Like, well, the fact that everything exists, I would say that's God, but not again in the sense of like, oh, God caused it or God created it or no. Everything is this expression of God. Like another thing we were talking, Jim and I were talking at the event. He used the analogy of, what if I took a cup of water and I went to the ocean and I dipped it in the ocean and I said, "This is the ocean in the cup." Does that make sense? Is that the ocean? Well, no. I mean, look at the ocean. It's massive. It's huge. It goes horizon to horizon and out as far as I can't even see where it ends or begins. So obviously, this cup is not the ocean. But in a way,
It
yes,
is.
this is the ocean. Like
Yeah.
everything that makes the ocean is in this cup. And that's the way we could say every God. We are all expressions of God. Another analogy, the one I like, is the idea of a flame. Is that, like if there was a massive bonfire, and you and I went up to the bonfire, and I had a candle, and I put my candle in and pulled out a flame, and you put your candle in and pulled out a flame. In one sense, you would say you have your flame and I have my flame, and then there's this big bonfire flame, and we have three flames. But in a
Hmm.
way, they're all the same fire. There's only one
Yeah.
fire. It's all the same fire. You can take pieces of it, and you can. That's one way to look at it, right? One perspective is to say these are all separate little fires, but they're not. They're just there's only the one fire. There's only one flame. So this idea that every flame is one flame, right?
Mm.
And again, this goes back to me what I see as what this non-dualistic, the kind of quote unquote Gnostic way of looking things. That's kind of what it's saying, is that the same God is in all of us. They're not separate expressions. In a way, they are. There's this, you have your personality, you have your perspective. Alan Watts talks about how God is sort of like in disguise or pretending, playing at, living these different lives, being these different people. But at the end, it's all still the same sort of quote unquote God. Again, not a person, not a being, but it's sort of
Right.
it's so hard to talk about it. It's so hard to explain it. The
It's
analogies always
impossible to
break
talk
down.
about. All we can do is point at it. Speaking of Alan Watts, I have a great quote for you,
Oh yeah.
and I'm sure you're familiar with it. Jesus Christ knew he was God, so wake up and find out eventually who you really are. In our culture, of course, they'll say you're crazy and you're blasphemous, and they'll either put you in a jail or in a nut house, which is pretty much the same thing. However, if you wake up in India and tell your friends and relations, my goodness, I've just discovered that I'm God, they'll laugh and say, oh, congratulations, at last you found out.
Right, right. And that, again, even that statement, like, so I hear people say a lot, the other side, not that God doesn't exist, but to say, I am God.
Yeah.
And that statement, I think it makes, I'll be honest, it kind of makes me bristle a little bit too, unless you drill down to what do you mean by that. You-
Well, it works in your analogy.
yes,
Like,
that's what I'm
is
saying.
that is that the ocean in the cup?
Right,
Yes and no. I
right,
mean, it's not the totality of the ocean,
right.
but it's made of nothing but ocean.
That's right. No. And see, that's exactly right. So you have to kind of do that mental thing to say, because again, in a Christian, uh monotheistic kind of mindset, right? God is this external, separate force, being, source, energy, whatever you want to call it, right? And we are created in the image of that God, but we're still separated from God. And there is even still like a sort of a stage of thinking of God as like this big, like I think of it like a big circle, and all humans are sort of like little tendrils that kind of poke out from the circle, right? That are kind of like still connected to God, but separate kind of individual experiences from God. I kind of went through these stages. Like that's where I went next. Of like, okay, yeah, we're all connected to God, but even that is wrong because we're not again necessarily separate pieces of God. We really are. We are all filled with the same God or Christ, whatever you want to talk about. It is something to really, I guess it becomes its own sort of philosophical conundrum, like we talked about free will and all that other kind of stuff. But I'm much
It
more interested in that
is.
kind of thinking than the other.
Yeah, it's a conundrum. This whole thing is very. I mean, it's only 9:30. I'm already exhausted, man. But if you this is why I love like the mystical traditions and all the faiths. It's like I think we're saying the same thing. That's why I laugh at the people who try to say that because Jesus said these things and
Yeah,
because it sounds like Buddhism or Hinduism that therefore he must have gone to the east to get this truth. And
right.
I would tend to think no, I think this is something we can all discover
Yeah,
about the universe and ourselves and then speak to it through our own cultural lens.
yeah,
But we're all saying the same thing, but we have a different vantage point. So if I'm pointing to, like the constellations or the moon, and you're pointing at them in El Paso and I'm in California, we can probably see similar things, but we see them from a different angle.
right.
And so it might look a little differently.
Yeah,
But when we describe it, a third party can look and say, oh, I see what they're doing. They're
yeah,
talking about the same thing, but they're pointing at it. And this is why they're kind of talking past each other, but kind of talking to each other.
yes,
Because they all have their own culture and their own life experiences, but they're pointing at this one great truth. And so when you have like Thich Nhat Hanh talk about the living Buddha and the living Christ,
yeah,
his conclusion would have been, well, it's the same thing
right.
from their own vantage point.
Exactly. No, exactly. I've always felt that way, or I don't know if I've always felt that way, but I felt that way a long time. Um, because you can't help it when you see it's not just Buddha and Jesus. It's also the elements of these same ideas and truths are scattered all throughout. Native American
Yep.
mysticism,
Yep.
philosophy, Socrates,
Yep.
Hinduism,
Yep.
and so when I see like you're saying like it's just something that human beings who are sort of in this mystical kind of search, they get still, they get quiet, they begin to ponder things, they observe different things. They can't help but process these ideas through their cultural religious lens, right?
That's all we
Um,
can do.
right. So they're going to call that by a different name. They're going
Right.
to use words like Brahma or Great
At-
Spirit
Atman.
or Atman or Source or Universe or what Truth or Love or whatever or Yahweh or Abba or whatever. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's all the same thing. It's all the same kind of idea. And again, that's what really fascinates me. That's why I feel really comfortable saying, no, this is where I'm moving. This is where I feel like I'm at. Um, I want to embrace that. And so, yeah, my starting point was Christianity, and it probably will always be Jesus will always be a very big part of kind of the core, the center of my spiritual, experience and ways of thinking. But I'm definitely widening my circle. I'm expanding my circle. I'm not narrowing it. I'm
Hmm.
expanding it to include all these other ideas and thoughts and voices and stuff. And to me, in a way, there's a sense in which I could say this is all still quote unquote Christianity, if we can agree that Valentinus and Ptolemy and these other guys were Christians. They thought they were. They said they were. They didn't say they weren't. So in a way, I think these are still quote unquote Christian ideas. There may not be some Christians didn't think they were, but that doesn't mean anything. Like people have different ideas.
But I think you're finding like your true spiritual path when you can hold loosely even Jesus and your Christianity,
Yeah.
because if you're holding loosely and someone snatches it out of your hand, to be like Christ or to be like the Buddha is to let them have it.
Yeah.
And Jesus said things like that. Like if someone takes your coat or sweater, give them your coat. If
Yeah.
someone asks you to walk a mile, walk two of them. You're not. So that's a part of, like, I think I'm being even more Christ like when someone has come along and says you're one with the devil, you're a heretic, you're this and that. They've taken away your Christianity, and you let them have it. Fine,
Sure.
have it. I don't need to create an idol out of Christianity. I don't need to create an
Right.
idol out of Jesus. Your your version of Christianity and the things you want to define as Christianity and your understanding of it and your Jesus, you can't really take that away from me.
Yeah.
You can't take away the Christ in me or my Buddha nature. You
Yeah.
can't. You can say things to me to hurt me
Yeah.
or to try to hurt me, but you really can't take that essence from me. So therefore, just have it.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, I care less and less about those labels and stuff, and I think you and I have talked about this before too. So the book that should be coming out hopefully in a couple of months. We'll see how long it takes to come out on embracing mystery. Um,
It's a mystery, Keith.
it's a
It's a
mystery.
mystery.
It's definitely a mystery what it'll
You
come
must
out.
embrace the mystery of the publishing process.
Yes, the choir publishing schedule.
Hey,
Um,
hey, it's all publishers, dude.
And I know it is. I know it is. And I know I'm super spoiled. Wendy was
Shots
reminding me.
fired.
Yeah,
Shots fired.
Wendy was reminding me, and I'm kind of complaining about it, like, because I want it to come out like, next week. And
Yeah,
Wendy was like, Keith, other publishers, they would tell you it'll be out in a year and a half, right?
exactly.
So, okay, I'm going to relax. I know I've got it really, really good. Thank you. I love you, Ralph. I love choir. No
He doesn't
complaints.
listen to this
I
shit.
know he
This
doesn't.
isn't a choir. This isn't an official choir
That's right.
podcast here.
That's right. I'm just putting it out there. But anyway, in the book, I'm talking about embracing mystery and all the same kind of things we're talking about in this podcast, really. And yet, as I'm writing the book, I still feel like I have to hold the hand of a lot of my readers. When I say something that seems scary, when I say something, I can feel their energy. I can feel them getting nervous. Like, Keith just said something that seems really heretical. And Keith just said something that seems really out there. And then I feel like to calm them down and make them feel safe, I have to go, now listen. I know that sounds scary, but look, here's a verse of scripture over here. And here's another verse. And here's another verse, right? And here's a quote from some other church fathers. See, this is okay. This is safe. You're okay. And so I still kind of feel at this stage anyway, or at least with my most recent book, that I have to quote scripture to kind of smooth coddle some people and again, I don't mean to. I'm not trying to talk down to people. I get it because people who are not where I'm at. I was at a place where I needed that too. But I'm looking forward. Let's put it this way: I'm looking forward to the day when I can write a book where I don't quote scripture at all, where I don't feel the need to I need to throw a scripture out there to validate this point of view or to to make somebody feel comfortable or comfort them in some kind of existential, oh, what am I doing? But just to be able to say, hey, here's an idea, and what do you think about it? And not have to say, well, Paul said the same thing in Hebrews, or the author of Hebrews said the same thing, or Colossians said the same thing. Yeah, I look forward to that day. I feel like I'm moving there. I feel like I'm going to definitely get to the place where I'm just going to start writing books that don't appeal to that.
If you keep moving toward more heresy, your target audience will become more those people who don't care.
That's right. That is exactly right. And that's reality, right? Like when we interviewed Derek Webb, he was talking about that, about how you just have to, as an artist, you have to be true to what is your truth. You have to communicate what you're seeing and what you're feeling. And if the people that were with you at the beginning can come along with you, great. If at some point you leave some people behind, that's okay. They can go. But here's the thing, but other people are going to come. Right.
Yep.
And so my audience might be shifting a little bit. People that were with me with Jesus Untangled, Jesus Unbound, they were with me through all these kind of things. They tracked with me through Undefeated and all that. Great. That's great. As I move away from that series and I move more into this direction of non-duality and Gnosticism and embracing other faiths and expanding my boundaries of spirituality and all that kind of stuff. If some people are going to be like, I can't go there, Keith, that's okay. because
That's
other
okay
people
too.
are going to resonate. They're going to say, "Oh, this is good. Yes, I like this. I'm in the same place," and
Yep.
and that's just the way it's going to be.
That's the way of the world. It's the way it works.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
this has been another good one.
yeah, man.
What
This has been
should
fun.
what should we do next time?
I don't know. Do we want to lock ourselves into an idea next
Hell
time?
no, because I haven't thought about it.
Yes. So we'll just leave it a mystery. It's a mystery.
It's like Keith's book and the
We'll
release of
embrace,
Keith's book.
we'll
It's a
embrace the
mystery.
mystery. Yes.
And yeah. So again, rate and review on iTunes if you could. Takes
Yeah.
2 seconds.
Yeah.
People.
Please do. Please do. And you know
Get
what?
off your asses and put in some work.
Yeah. And I would also say too, like if this conversation was stimulating and encouraging to you, share it. Share it on
Yeah.
social media. Like, hey, this was a great conversation. Check it out, because that helps too.
Please.
To share links, to share, and let people know, hey, this really challenged me or inspired me, or hopefully we did one of those things. That was an interesting conversation. Let people know about it.
And if it didn't arouse you and stimulate you, just share it and say, this is the most boring conversation, and I need everyone to understand how boring it is.
Yes, I can't believe these guys spent an hour talking about this stupid stuff.
Ah, God, these stupid idiots. And if you don't like it, just listen to Heretic Happy Hour next week.
That's right. We have a great series going on. You'll love it.
We do. Yeah, in which we both talk very little compared to normal.
Yes. You know what? That's kind of what this is about, isn't it? We talk so much less because now we have 4 total co-hosts, right? And the series, yes, there's a fifth person kind of, and they're doing most of the talking. We're just kind of like going, oh wow, fascinating. Let me ask a question. Yeah, yeah. So and I love that. Some people would say, like me talking less probably does improve the quality of the podcast. So I understand that. I get that.
I've been thinking that a long time, Keith.
Yeah. I think you're not alone.
I'm just kidding. I'm just busting your balls. Just busting your balls. All right. Well, thanks, Keith. We'll see you next time.
All right, man. Take care.
All right. Peace.